Welcome to the place where we learn about and learn from the leaders in our field who are powering human creativity. I am Aaron Dworkin, and this is Arts Engines. Thanks again for joining me here on Arts Engines. Today's guest is Miriam Goldberg Owens, who serves as president and the CEO of the People's Music School in Chicago. Miriam, welcome to the show.
It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having the People's Music School back. We are great fans of Art Engines here at People's.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful partnership, obviously one of our great creative partners. And not only that, I've firsthand been able to see some of the extraordinary work that is done at the school. Obviously, Sphinx has been able to partner. And so just a wonderful, wonderful arts institution. And one of the things that I wanted to, I know last time, and maybe it'd be good just as a quick kind of overview for anyone in our audience who may not be fully familiar with People's, could you kind of give us just a quick snapshot of People's itself and the breadth and impact that you have?
Sure thing. So we are Chicago's oldest and largest completely free music school. So we serve over 725 low-income students across the city of Chicago with intensive music education. So students get over 4 hours of after-school music instruction every single week. We have 4 different sites. We teach 21 different orchestral instruments. Our mission is to increase access to the benefits of tuition-free intensive music education. So we do that only for students who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford it. And we've been around since 1976. So we're pretty excited about what we do.
It is awesome, and you captured that so succinctly. Yet there is so much that you do, and you captured it. It really is just, it's amazing. And so obviously, just with what you shared, right, what permeates through all of that is what certainly one would think of as excellence. But here on Arts Engines, we really want to try to be able to give our audience kind of a window into leaders such as yourself and institutions and kind of these thoughts and principles. And I know that one of these for you is radical excellence, this idea. So first, can you just share, when you think of radical excellence and how that manifests at People's, first for the audience, what does that mean?
Yeah, so maybe I'll give a little bit of context in our history. So we have what I think is actually quite a radical history. We were founded in 1976 by Dr. Rita Simo, who is an immigrant from the Dominican Republic, concert pianist in her own right. And when she moved here, she was totally thunderstruck that the United States didn't have free music education. She had this radical belief that intensive music education is a right, that anyone should have access to it. And there's this really fantastic video of her saying, you know, nothing makes me more mad than when people say, it's just such a great thing you're doing for these kids. She says, I'm not a do-gooder. I'm giving the kids what they deserve. So we think of ourselves as, we're not an ordinary music school. And what distinguishes us is that, and what I think makes us really quite radical, is that we think that all students should have access to intensive and excellent music education. We only serve students who otherwise wouldn't have access to that. And the other thing I think that makes us radical is our inclusivity. You know, so a lot of music education and music formation focuses on identifying the potential for excellence as something that is this fixed quality. And you either have it or you don't. And if you have it, you know, it should be cultivated. And if you don't have it, well, then maybe music education isn't for you. And for People's, we think of it differently. You know, we say we're both radically inclusive and radically excellent. And our goal is to give all of our students who want to be a part of our school and otherwise wouldn't have the means, the tools that they need to be as musically excellent as they possibly can be. We want students to be both retained in our program over a long period of time and also progress musically, ensure that every single one is progressing to the fullness of their ability. So for many of our students, that looks pretty recognizable as what you would see as musical excellence. So our students are members of the Chicago Youth Symphony Orchestra. We have alumni in Civic Orchestra of Chicago, alumni who have gone on to distinguished musical and non-musical careers. For some of our other students, Excellence might look like, depending on their learning needs, it might look like holding their instrument correctly for the full hour of their class. So what we're committed to at Peoples is this radically inclusive learning environment where every student is supported in a continuous pursuit of excellence, because we know how much intensive music education benefits everyone, not only students who achieve what you might otherwise consider to be this, mainstream perception of what musical excellence looks like.
Absolutely. And of course, it's such a critically important approach, and one that, as you described, has impact for the broad breadth of who Chicago really is. And so I'm curious, right? So we have a lot of people who watch the show are administrators in their own right at different institutions. And so sometimes you certainly will hear people say, well, we would love to be more, inclusive or whatever, but we need to have students where their families are paying X tuition and so on and so forth. Or we only want the students who are going into, local civic orchestra or youth orchestra, these types of things. So what I'm curious is to take what is this incredible ideal that you actually practice every day, but could you share with us, so, as an administrator, what does that mean in terms of kind of bottom line for funding, for other administrative aspects? Do you have to face those as it relates to your mission, and how do you balance the two?
Yeah, it's a really fantastic question. So, as we think about, we actually partner with a tremendous number of really fantastic funders that I think really understand what it is that we're trying to do, especially on an institutional level, when we share what our aspirations are and what our mission is and how we're bringing that to life, I think we find quite a lot of support for that. And one thing actually that I've been thinking a lot about, I've been here at the school and actually leading development, for the last year or so. We have a really number of wonderful funders that are really in the music space, and we've historically considered ourselves to be chiefly a music institution. And I think one thing that we're thinking about now in terms of pivoting the way that we position ourselves is that we are not only a music institution, not even a music education institution, but we are actually an education institution, and like thinking about targeting funders that are looking not just at music and arts, but looking at how do we create transformational impact in low-income communities and underserved communities generally, because we see ourselves as a really critical part of that ecosystem, that what we do goes so much further beyond music. So if you're only looking, for an organization that is going to educate, the very tippy top of achievement, then maybe we're not the organization for you. We're going to do that. We're going to have a fantastic number of students that are going to achieve incredibly highly, and we do. But if you're not interested also in educating students, that may not have means, that may not have, and they have more challenges, then, that's really what we focus on here. The other thing to talk about administratively is that being an education institution and thinking about, radical excellence for students, who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford it. And to your point, sometimes have challenges at home that other students may not have. It raises the burden. I think you've spoken with Natalie Butler before about our professional development, for our faculty. And that's something that we take incredibly seriously, because our 70 plus teaching artists come to us primarily as artists, first. They are trained as artists. Many of them are conservatory trained. A lot of them also know a lot about music education as well, but we see the onus on us to teach our teachers how to be effective. We call it phenomenal teaching. We think about how are our teachers phenomenal educators? And sometimes that means unlearning some of the things you might have learned at conservatory. Sometimes that means like thinking about, well, if the student isn't practicing and they aren't committed, well, is that true? Or like, might they not have the opportunity to practice because of the way that their housing situation is? And so we think about, if the only thing you have control over as a teacher is the minutes between the start time and the end time of your class, how does that change how you practice? How does that change the way that you educate the student you have in front of you? Because there may not be those other things that you're used to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also love how you touched on the fact that the impact goes beyond the music education. You're really developing citizens, human beings. And wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that in terms of music education, right? So, and there's sometimes we all face in the arts, sometimes people are like, but what's the value of music education, et cetera? And just wondering if you could share, what do you see in terms of this ultimate impact of the work that you do on young people? Why is it so important?
I want to start with a couple of stories that illustrate this. So last spring, we started in-person instruction for the first time since the start of the pandemic. And I was sitting in the lobby with one of our voice students. It was the first week of in-person classes, and she had actually started with us during the pandemic. And I was just making small talk with her, chatting with her about, but while her, waiting for her mom to pick her up. She's a voice student. I'm also a singer, and so I was kind of trying to bond with her in that. It's like, so tell me, like, you like to sing, you like voice lessons. Why do you like to sing? And she thought about it for a second. And then she said, when I sing, I feel like me. And it was so evocative to me, because someone who sings myself, like, that's exactly how I feel, and that's what we're doing for our hundreds of students, is giving them this space to feel like themselves, to feel kind of fully realized. And then another moment that I found just so evocative recently, there was a community event where we had a young violin student named Aris who was going to play a solo violin piece in front of about 50 community members. And just as he was starting to play, you could tell something was kind of off. He stumbled over the first couple of bars, but he didn't panic and he didn't freak out. He didn't, he kept complete composure. And with this self-possession that I don't know that I would have been able to pull off in this situation, he just said, could I start again? And he started again. He played the whole piece. It was beautiful. And then he bowed and it was wonderful and everybody applauded. And what I love so much about that moment is witnessing that it's not just that he's learned to play music. He's learned to be centered in himself. He's learned to push through challenges and to believe that his expression has a place, even if what he has to do is create the conditions for his success on his own terms. And that's something that comes out in a certain way when he's in a performance, but it comes out in a different way later, the next day in his classroom. It's going to come out in 10 or 15 years in the workplace, in the boardroom, maybe even at home. And so these are some of these skills that they're going to carry with them forever. And of course, I could quote a bunch of research that, music education increases neuroplasticity, it increases, engagement at school attendance, socio-emotional well-being, all of these wonderful things that we already know. And there's tons of articles, but every day we see these examples of our students embodying this very fully in those kind of small moments.
Thank you so much for sharing those two, because it just illustrates so much the importance of this and this work that you all do so well. Unfortunately, we are just about out of time, but I always like to ask of all my guests, you're in these administrative roles, you have now been in the CEO role, relatively short period of time. There's got to be some tough days, right? Days where it's like, this doesn't happen, or these things are a challenge, et cetera, or what we all experience at different times, funding issues, et cetera. Where as a leader do you draw upon for strength, for inspiration, or for guidance in those toughest of situations?
So I came to this job from a slightly non-traditional trajectory. Right before this, I spent 8 years at McKinsey. And actually before that, I was in education. So I taught fifth grade science, and then I worked for an education advocacy organization. Then I went to business school, and I've been a consultant for a while before I came to this job. And, it was a really wonderful experience being at McKinsey. I learned so much that I apply every single day. What I didn't always have, day to day, was a really strong sense of my why. I had to kind of draw, a line between what I was doing to my sense of purpose. And I didn't always feel like I could draw that line with a bold Sharpie. I sometimes kind of felt like I could draw it with like a pencil. And now I feel like I'm drawing it with like the widest paintbrush that I can imagine, that like every single day, no matter how tough it is, I think about, Princess, the student that I was just talking about, who said, when I sing, I feel like me. I think about Addis. I think about, the other student who was performing John, and I think about, like, we do so much incredible things already, and there's so much more that we can do in Chicago. And so no matter how hard it gets, the way that I've described it to people is that I couldn't imagine, beyond people's, when I was thinking about a place to go after McKinsey, I literally said, I want to go work for an organization that does elite arts education with no tuition for low-income communities. I'd never heard of People's, and so now that I'm here, I feel like I'm at the center of my Venn diagram of what matters to me personally, and so I've never woken up once in the last year and thought, why am I here? I'm always excited to be here.
Miriam Goldberg Owens, you truly are one of the arts engines who is fueling human creativity in our world. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.